people in the world over. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Eva Schloss.
Thank you for that kind welcome.
I told Sarah I said the switch off something close on here.
Oh,
Look.
okay. The air conditioning is a little blowy from Mrs. Schloss. Okay.
Blow away on
No, we don't want you to blow away, please. Let me start by just saying thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the strength and courage that it must take to tell your story to so many audiences over and over again, audiences just like this. I truly can't imagine the strength and the courage that it takes to do this, but we're about to learn much about your inner strength and courage, which begins really when you were about 9, 10 years old. I understand your early years were spent in Vienna, Austria, and in those days, life wasn't so bad as a Jewish little girl.
No, not at all. Not at all. We were very, very happy family, Jewish family, of course, but not that religious. And we mixed with everybody. There was nobody asked, are you Jewish, are you Catholic? And I had extended family, grandparents, aunts, cousins, a brother, father, mother. And we were very, very happy. Life is beautiful in Austria. It's a beautiful country, mountain, lake.
You even had Jewish education, I understand.
We had Jewish education. That was different from in America. On the continent, you had to have, every child had to have religious education in their own school. So most children were Catholic, of course. We had, I think, about 7 Jewish children in our class. And the Jewish children, 2 or 3 times a week, we were called out from the classroom, and we went to a different classroom, and we had Jewish education. And that was quite nobody minded, nobody objected, was accepted. But this was, of course, as soon as the Nazis marched in, everybody knew who was Jewish. And then immediately we started to be attacked.
And what were the first signs of anti-Semitism that you remember?
Well, that was actually, I went usually after school to my best friend who was a Catholic little girl. But the day after the Nazis had entered Austria, I went again back there, not expecting any change. And when the mother saw me with a furious face, she said, I never want to see you here again. And she slammed the door in my face. I went home crying. I said to my mother, I don't understand. We didn't have a quarrel. Why can't I go and play with my best friend? My mother said, well, for Jewish people, life is changed now. It's going to be very, very difficult. My brother went to school. He came home all really badly beaten up. Blood was streaming from all his head and his face. And when we asked him what has happened, he said, my own friends attacked me, and the teachers were there watching it.
So your parents saw the writing on the wall, but they decided to stay in Europe. They decided to go where they thought they would be safe. Tell us how they ended in Amsterdam.
Well, you know, a lot of people, by 1938, a lot of people wanted to leave Austria, of course, and many to America, many to Switzerland, Australia, anywhere. But it was practically impossible to get a visa. And that was really the disaster of the Holocaust. And Hitler realized that. And at first he didn't want to kill Jewish people. He just wanted to get rid of them. And the best proof I have, my husband's father was arrested very early in 1933, taken to Dachau. After 3 years, they released him under the condition that within 6 weeks he leaves the country with his family. And they were not wealthy people, they had no influence, they didn't know people abroad, and the mother went to consulate and consulate everywhere, couldn't get a visa. Eventually she heard from the British consul had a few visas for special cases to go to Palestine, and that's how they were able to escape. But that was very, very rare, because the British too didn't want to upset the Arabs already at that time, and and the Arabs didn't want any more Jews in, so the visas for Palestine were like gold dust.
So your father was left with no options. It was you, your brother, your mother, and your father, and you went first to Belgium and then to the Netherlands?
Well, my father had a business, had a shoe factory which he had inherited from his father, and he went immediately after the Nazis came. He went, so to say, on a business trip that was still possible to Holland, and he never intended to come back. And actually, I found recently in all the papers for my mother a letter from the Austrian tax saying that my father has escaped and hasn't paid his tax, and they demanded a huge tax bill. Of course, my father wouldn't return. So when we wanted to follow, we didn't have a visa either, we couldn't go. And so we went to Belgium, but we hoped we would be reunited. And that really happened in February 1940. My father got a visa for us to come and visit him for 3 months in Holland. So we took a furnished apartment on the Merwedeplein. That is an open space with apartments on both sides, like a triangle. In the middle was a skyscraper, the tallest building in Amsterdam at the time, 9 floors high. And there was in apartments, of course, there are no yards for children to play. So all the children came out in the street after school, and we played together. Not just Jewish children, Christian children, all the neighborhood children, because this was a very good space. And one day a little girl came to me and introduced herself. She was very well brought up, and said her family comes from Germany, and so she took me up to her apartment because I didn't speak much Dutch, and she said her father will be able to speak German to me. And this is how I met Otto Frank, never suspecting how close we'll become many years later. And her older sister Margot, her mother, and we became friends. I was 11 years old, and I was just 1 month younger than me. And after school, we met up, and I went to a Montessori school. That was already a little bit different. So obviously, Otto realized that she needed perhaps special attention, being a bit different. Her older sister went to an ordinary school.
Being different, you mean being extraordinarily intelligent?
Well, I don't know, just more headstrong perhaps. She hated...
Defiant?
Yeah, she hated maths. She had quite a strong will, and perhaps she needed a different treatment from an ordinary school. The classes were, of course, much smaller there, and she seemed to have done very well there. But she was a big, big chatterbox. Her nickname in school was Mrs. Quack Quack, because she never stopped talking. Very often she had to stay behind in school and write lines, 100 lines. I'm not going to talk so much in class, but it didn't help. Next week, the same thing happened again. And I noticed I actually had become quite shy through already my bad experience. First, discrimination in Austria, then again, actually discrimination in Belgium, difficulties with languages, and I didn't speak the language properly then in Holland. So I admired her because she was very outgoing, very sure of herself, wanted always the attention of everybody, quite bossy, and as well, very interested already in boys. When I told her I had an older brother, her eyes grew very, very big, and she said, well, when can I come to your apartment?
She had good taste. May I ask you, Mrs. Schloss, what was the turning point at which your parents and Anne Frank's parents decided that it was time to go into hiding?
Oh, that was of course much later. Just going quickly through this period, we were very, very happy in Holland. The people were very nice, very welcoming. There was no anti-Semitism at all. On the contrary, they said, we are very glad that you came here. And, but it didn't last very long. But in 1940, in May, the Germans invaded Holland as well. We tried to escape still to England, but it was too late. So we realized we were really trapped. I think you want me to fly away. I'm still really sitting in a terrible draft. I'm sorry about that, but you know, you are not. You can see.
Let me see.
It's really here. I'm feeling the wind coming.
Maybe we can move her proceed a few feet. That would be good.
But I don't know where it comes from. It just blows, it just blows. I don't know what
a blanket on your legs?
I don't know where it comes from, this wind. So, the Germans came in and the measures against the Jewish population started. Life became very, very difficult. I'll just tell you a couple of things which became really very dangerous. We had to leave our schools, go to Jewish schools, but by itself you will laugh. You said, well, what's wrong with that? But the Germans came knowing there were a lot of kids there, came with trucks, went into classroom, told the children to go on the truck, and the parents waited in the evening for the children to come home, never turned up. They went to the police, went everywhere to find out. No way, nobody knew what had happened. They just disappeared. They're never seen anymore. After the war, we heard that they were taken to Mauthausen, this terrible Austrian death camp, and just thrown down from the cliffs. So you can imagine it became really dangerous. As well, then they rounded up 10,000 Jewish boys and men from the middle of the city, and they disappeared as well. So life became really very, very dangerous. To go out, to go to school, to go shopping, anything. So after 2 years living in fear, my brother and his sister Margot and about 10,000 also young people got a call-up notice to report within a few days to a certain place to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. So many parents sent their children, young people, thinking they need people to work in the factories and they're strong and young, nothing will happen to them. But that is when my father and my brother and Otto Frank decided they wouldn't send their kids, but we would go into hiding. And those youngsters who did go to Germany never went to Germany. Again, they were just taken to Mauthausen and murdered there.
So your father...
So my father and Otto and many, many others did the right thing. It was of course not so easy. One day my father called us together and said, life is too dangerous here. He said to Heinz, you're not going, you're staying. Heinz said, well, how can I stay? You know, they will arrest me. And Father said, we're going to go into hiding. We are going to live with strange people we don't even know yet. Dutch Christian people who have the courage to take in Jewish people, risking their life. Many of those very brave people were arrested and killed as well.
Now, the world knows where Anne Frank hid in the annex. Where were you and your family hidden?
It was quite different. We were staying with strange people who had this little spare room, and this is where we stayed for 2 years in different hiding places. But the Germans knew that not everybody had turned up to be deported, and they really wanted to kill every Jewish person. So they made house searches. So at night there was a knock on the door, they stormed in and searched your home. So people from the resistance came to every hiding place where we were and said we must build a hiding place within the hiding place. So they looked over the apartment and then they built false partition, making a room smaller, sometimes in a cupboard, even a false wall. And so at night when they came, we quickly went into this place, hoping they wouldn't find it. We heard the story when again they went into a home where Jewish people were. They always came at night, and they felt the beds which were still warm. So they realized people were hiding there. So they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And everybody was taken away, including the host family, of course. And when you hear stories like that, people became very nervous and said, you have to find different hiding places. So we moved around perhaps 6, 7 times, different places.
For 2 years?
For 2 years.
And you were how old?
We were 2 years in hiding.
You were how old?
I was, well...
13?
Well, 13, 14, 15. On our 15th birthday, I was arrested. How this happened was, my father was staying in the country, and the woman there started to blackmail them for more money. And so my father phoned my mother and said, you must find us a new hiding place, and we can't stay here anymore. So in 1944, it became already very, very difficult to find safe hiding places. And eventually a Dutch nurse came forward and said she knows a safe place. And so my father and brother escaped from this woman who blackmailed them, and met this nurse. She took them to a very nice home, and they felt very happy, very safe there. And the next day they were arrested because his nurse was a double agent. She really worked for the Nazis, but pretended she was a member of the resistance.
Mrs. Schloss, may I ask you, do you believe that the same nurse is the person that betrayed the Frank family? Or did we never find out who betrayed the Frank
no,
family?
I don't think so, because the Frank family never changed hiding place. And this, we know who betrayed us, but we don't know who betrayed the Frank family. You might have read about it, that people say they know who it was, but Otto had many, many court cases. Till 1962, there were always people suspected, and there were court cases. There was never any proof, and at that time Otto said, I don't really want to know anymore. He was always very, very nervous, very emotional for him to testify and to go to court. And meeting people who he knows, people who worked in his factory, in his office, and other friends, and so, and they were never proven guilty. But he said, I just don't want to know, it won't bring my family back, so let's just move on. So, and of course, by now, there's nobody alive anymore from this period, so it will never be known.
So your family is arrested and you're rounded up and put where?
First, I was interrogated. They wanted to know who had helped us. They beat me up really very, very badly. And I knew the people, of course, who helped me, but helped us. But I didn't know their names or where they lived, the people from the resistance. So I didn't betray anybody. Then they threatened they would kill my brother. That was the first time I realized I didn't understand why we were arrested, and I didn't know that my father and brother were arrested as well. But when they said my brother was going to be killed, I realized he must have been called. And then when we were reunited again, my father told me about this nurse. The Nazis came in with their own key in that house. This nurse betrayed over 200 people, all being sent to their deaths. And she got, after the war, only 4 years.
So you were taken to interrogation.
We were interrogation, and then we were taken to a holding camp, Westerbork, in the north of Holland. And if you would have stayed there, we probably all would have survived. But every week, and this was a terrible thing, it was a camp, but it was not really bad. People didn't die there. It was supervised by Nazis, but it was run really by Jewish people. And there was, the people met, their families were together, and they had even, a bit like Theresienstadt, Teresine. They did plays, and they did work, but the evenings they were taking meals together. It wasn't a bad thing. But the Jewish people, the commander, had to, every week, the German said to him, I need a list of 1,500, 2,000 people to be sent on transport, to be sent to their deaths. So can you imagine, this man had to make up lists of people he knew he was going to send to their death. So of course, if you knew him, if you were relatives of him or friends of him, you were not put on the list. But we had just come, we didn't know anybody there yet, and so we were immediately put on the list with about 2,000 other people. Actually, in our group were 500 gypsies as well, because Hitler didn't just kill Jewish people, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, communists, Jewish people, but Jewish people were, of course, the biggest number of people who were deported.
So I know you write about the fact that there had been rumors, at this point, knowledge that people had disappeared and were not coming back. So did you know where you were going? Did you know what?
But they never told us where we were going. They never talked to us as human beings to each other. They just put you in transport and you arrived wherever. So we had a little bit of hope, and there were work camps as well. In the work camps, people were badly treated, were practically no food, and then when they were too weak to work, they were sent to the death camps. So we had hoped perhaps we were going to go sent to a work camp. In the cattle truck, my father, with tears in his eyes, apologized to us that from now on he can't protect us anymore. If you have children, can you imagine that you're powerless to protect them from death? So my father, it was a terrible, terrible thing. And my brother, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was a very, very talented musician, but of course in hiding he couldn't make any sound. He had to be very quiet, not even look out of the window. And so he tried to do something else. So he started painting, and he created some amazing paintings. Afterwards, about 10 of them are displayed here. Have a look at them, and as well the history of it. It's really a very, very moving experience. And the artwork is really amazing. He was 16 years old. And in the cattle truck, he told me when they escaped from this woman who was blackmailing them, he hid the paintings under the floorboards there with a note on it. They belonged to Heinz and Erich Geiringer, and after the war, he's coming to pick it up again. So that was the last conversation I had with him.
That was the last time you saw both your father and brother.
Yeah.
And then where did the transport take you ultimately?
And you asked me if I knew about Auschwitz.
Yes.
While we were in hiding, you were not allowed to listen to foreign broadcast, only to German or Dutch broadcast. But people did, of course, because we were desperate to hear the true progress of the war. And so there was a little Bakelite radio hidden in a cupboard, and very softly we listened to it. And the British, the BBC, sent broadcast out to all the occupied countries in their own language. And the Dutch broadcast was at 9 o'clock, and I remember it very clearly. It started with da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. That is the BBC from London, and all the news came. Of course, it told about the progress which was being made, and as well, in May 1940s, it told already about the invasion was going to be soon, very soon, and as well about the 300 work camps, concentration camps, and death camps in Germany and Poland. 300 of them. And
So you were aware they
Auschwitz
existed.
was always mentioned as the biggest. And they told us, because they really wanted people to know about it, there in Auschwitz, where Jewish people at arrival were systematically being gassed. So, but as I say, we hoped we wouldn't be sent to any of those terrible camps.
Do you have any recollection how long you were being transported for?
Exactly, we don't know, because it was dark all the time. Once a day, the doors were opened up, and Brett was Frank, who was of course betrayed in August 44, and there was a last transport in September to go to Auschwitz from Holland. And so the family was there as well. and the girls were taken out of Auschwitz and taken to Bergen-Belsen. I mean, of course, I didn't know. I never met them in the camp. And so the camp became very small, and many of the guards had gone as well because they were afraid of the Russians. And so most people left, but by fluke, my mother and me didn't. We stayed behind there.
But how is it that your mother survived?
Yeah, I was too fast. So I tried to go to this part where they told me where my mother was. And as I said, at that time, the guards were not really very strict anymore, and you could move from one camp to the other. I mean, that was still all barbed wire camp, but you could go from A, B, or C to a different part through different tricks. You know, it's quite complicated, but anyway, so I was able to get there, and indeed I found my mother. And that was, of course, you know, amazing.
And did she ever share with you how she escaped selection?
Of course. And my book, Eva's story, my mother was still alive. I wrote it in 1988, and she wrote 3 chapters herself, and she wrote exactly what has happened. And I'll just tell you a little bit. She was 40 years old at the time, and when she marched to the gas chamber, she prayed to God that at least her children would survive. She had accepted that she would die. And, but she had after that another 53 years and 27 happy years married to Otto Frank. So really that was quite amazing. But anyway, we were together, we stayed together, and the Germans still took more and more people out of the camp. And then one day we woke up and it was very, very silent, and we got outside and all the Germans had left, and most of the people had gone with them. There were about 300 women left behind, and most of them were in a really very bad condition.
Including yourself at this point.
Including myself and certainly my mother.
Very weak.
And so we were 10 days on our own, and then one day we walked around again. My mother could hardly get out of her bunk, and so I brought, we found bread and water and things. We fed the people who could walk around. And we saw at the gate a huge creature, all in furs and icicle, and was terribly, terribly cold. And from the distance I thought it was a bear. You know, the Russians wear those big fur hats and fur coats. And, but when I looked closer, it was a Russian soldier.
And was there a moment where you said to yourself, this nightmare is over?
No,
or was it gradual?
Not yet, because we didn't know how could he help us, what was going to happen now, you know. And so he told us that he was a scout, he was just investigating before the army was coming, were they going to fight here or can they just advance? But more will come. And after 10 days, more Russians came with horses, with cannons, with trucks, tanks, everything, and stayed the night with us there and put up their field kitchen and cooked for themselves, but they gave us as well our first meal, a hot meal, very, very, very greasy cabbage soup. But
Probably nothing ever tasted better
was just too wonderful, you know. And they gave us big, big bowls with this greasy food, and we just ate and ate and ate. And I've never spent such a painful night on a bucket because food went straight through me. And we realized we had to be
cabbage
very,
soup.
and greasy. So you can imagine. But in the morning, people were dead because the overeating, the energy of digesting food wasn't there. And so we realized we have to be very, very careful. But we were obsessed with food. You know, for many, many years, food was just unbelievable. We hoarded it, and my children still laugh. They say, Mom even squeezes out the milk bottle. And you know, there's no piece of food is thrown away in our house.
So you're with your mother and with the Russian transport, and they take you to Russia.
They took us to Russia because the war wasn't finished. We couldn't go back to the west. So the fighting was still fierce there. So we went eastward with the Russians. They were very, very good. I know the Russians are not popular in America, but I have no complaints. They really saved our lives, looked after us, fed us, clothed us. We got Russian uniforms because we were still in rags. And there was no rape or anything. You know, they really were very, very, very good to us. And eventually, after 4 months traveling, we saw unbelievable devastation through Russia, through the Ukraine. We ended up in Odessa, and there we waited for the end of the war. And when that came, of course, there was jubilation, and we realized we had survived. Otto Frank was with us because I went to the men's camp to see if I could find my husband and father, but they were not there anymore. But I found Otto Frank. So he did all this journey with us. And he had heard that his wife had died, but he had great hopes that his daughters would be alive. He always said, I think my daughters will be alive still.
So was it then Otto Frank's idea to try to return to Amsterdam?
No, it was, we had no money, and we couldn't go. We were dependent on the authorities. And a New Zealand troop transport ship came to Odessa, and we were transported back to the west. There were French people, Belgian people, Italian people, from all countries, very international. We all could go back to wherever we wanted to go back. And we, of course, wanted to go back to Holland. And eventually, so we traveled from January to June, all the time on the go. And in June, we arrived back in Amsterdam. And we were lucky we were able to get back into our apartment because it had been furnished and belonged to a Christian. And nobody had moved in there, so we could get back in. But Otto had nowhere to go, and most people didn't have anywhere to go because other people moved into their apartments, and that was it. And the Germans again took everything from Jewish apartments, took away and shipped it to Germany. And then we waited for news of our family. And that was very, very depressing area. We went around to people who had been to camps asking them, have you seen this one? Do you know about this one? And so on. And eventually we got a notification from the Red Cross that both my father and brother had perished in Mauthausen, this terrible, terrible Austrian death camp, several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. That was for us, for my mother and me, the last straw. We had survived, but as I say, hoping we would get back to normality, and this was shattered. And I must say, I didn't accept it, and that was again very bad. I heard as well about September 11, what happened here, that people, if their loved ones just disappeared and there was no trace to be found of them, people just couldn't accept it, that they would never come back again. So this was a difficulty for me, that I believed, and it did happen. For years, people did come back from Germany, from Poland, from Russia even, that had been ill, that had been taken there, and they were put in displaced people camps and were not able to return, and all kinds of stories. And very often people did return after many, many years. So that made it even more difficult for me to live with this idea that my father and brother wouldn't return. Otto Frank came as well to tell us the devastating news that both his girls had died. He was 57 years old at the time, and when he left, I sat on my mother's lap and we cried, and my mother said, how can this man carry on with his life? He has nothing to live for. We at least have still each other. And a few days later, he came again with a brown parcel on his arm. I remember it very clearly. He still looked very, very pale, but there was a bit of light in his eyes. And he said, I must show you something. And he opened it very, very carefully. And you can guess what it was. It was Anna's diary. And he opened it and he read a few lines, but he burst into tears. He couldn't take it. It took him 3 weeks to read it, and he was amazed. He always said, I didn't know my own child. He knew, of course, she was writing a diary. He had given it to her actually on her 13th birthday, but he had no idea what she was writing.
Or that she was such a talented writer.
Yeah, that he didn't know either. He had done homework with her, and he knew she was a clever girl, but he had no idea she had such deep thoughts. And as well, she writes, for instance, that she has two sides, the bad side and the good side, and she wants to change, she wants to become a good person. She knows she goes on people's nerves and things like that. She knew she was really quite a naughty girl, but she was not happy with who she was, and she was working on it to become a very, very good and decent person.
And the idea of making her diary public didn't come for
he had
quite some time.
He had no intention at all of publishing it, but he was very proud of it, and he showed it to everybody. And he showed it to a history professor and this lady, and she said, it's your duty to publish it. So he came to my mother as well and discussed it with her and so, and my mother said, well, I think it is worthwhile for you to make the effort to publish it.
This was before they were married?
Yeah.
Can you take us through a little bit of your life after the war in Amsterdam? Your mother, how did you survive? What did she do for work? And take us to when...
Well, this is, very often people don't realize how difficult it was to make a life again after such a disaster. Nowadays, when when a hostage is taken and freed, or people come from Iraq or Afghanistan and their trauma, the first thing is you let them speak. But at that time, people were all in shock after the war, and people didn't really want to hear any more about it. And when I wanted to talk about it, because I wanted to talk about it, people said, well, we don't really want to hear, try to forget it and move on. But that's easier said than done. So I had nightmares, I was terribly, terribly unhappy. I hated everybody as well, not just the Germans, but the whole world, because I realized it could have been avoided. So I was a really miserable teenager, and Otto Frank came very often to talk to us. He helped my mother, he helped me, and he, who had lost everything, had no hatred in him. And he was really amazing. And he told me, if you hate people, you will be miserable. The people you hate, they don't care, they don't know. So try to put a smile on your face, go out in the world, you will see there's some great people around. So I tried, but I didn't succeed. I was too miserable, and I hoped still that my family would come back. So that was really a terrible time. My mother had to get to work, and it was very difficult. And when I finished school, Otto said as well, I felt I was an adult already, didn't really want to go to school, but I didn't relate to classmates, I didn't make friends. And when I finished, I didn't really know I didn't know what to do with my life. And Otto and my mother decided I should become a photographer. And I didn't care, I said, okay, I wasn't enthusiastic about it, but okay, it's something to do. And I was very miserable in Amsterdam. I don't know why, because it's a beautiful city, but at that time I just didn't like anything. And Otto suggested, he said, it would be good if you would go away to another country, perhaps for a year. And he knew somebody in London who had a photographic studio. And I got a job there as an apprentice. So I came to London in 1951 for 1 year, and I lived in a little boarding house where there were some other young people, and there was a young man from Israel who had come to study economics. If you've been in England in the last 10, 20 years, you will notice half the country is foreign. We have people from all over the world settled there now. But at the time in the 50s, a foreigner was a bloody foreigner. The English didn't like foreigners. So I couldn't really make friends with English people. So this Israeli boy and me got quite friendly. We both didn't have any money, so we went for long walks. And we talked about the future, about things, what I intend to do and what he intends to do. We never talked about the past. He didn't tell me what he had gone through. I didn't tell him anything. I said, I come from Holland, and that was it. And after 6 months, he said to me one day, Eva, I've fallen in love with you. Will you marry me? And we can start a new life and go back to Israel. And I said, no, thank you. Because I have a widowed mother in Amsterdam. And after this year is over, I'm going to go back to Amsterdam. And then Otto came over one day because he kind of kept an eye on me. He looked after me. And I told him that, and he said, well, you know, your mother and me have fallen in love as well. And once you are settled, we like to get married. So I went to this young man and said, now you can marry me. And he was very, very happy, of course. But I tell you, you know, we didn't really know each other. He said he was an Israeli, which he wasn't. He was really German. And I said I was Dutch, which I wasn't. So, but, you know, we were married for 62 years. So it was obviously a good story. We have 3 daughters, and they became, of course, our daughters, but they were Otto's and my mother's grandchildren. So Otto had again a family. He really, he was very, very proud of the 3 little girls. He always had the photos in his breast pocket, and was the first one to show his little grandchildren. I am blonde and fair, but my husband is dark, and all the girls are dark, and a little bit the types. You don't look in features, but a bit of type of Anne. And very often Otto called my oldest daughter Anne by mistake. But you know, it was very difficult for the children to grow up with they didn't know my history, but they knew about Anne, because Otto talked continuously about her. And when they did something naughty, he took them aside and said, you know, Anne would have done it this way, and so. And when they were little, they didn't know, who is this Anne? He always, their grandfather always talks about this little girl who doesn't even exist. So my youngest daughter suffered very much about it. She never wanted to stay alone at her grandparents. She said, it's spooky there, there's too much, there's like a ghost around, and photos of Anne and things about her
At this
everywhere.
point, had the diary become world famous?
Well, when it was published in America, and Otto had great difficulty finding a publisher, he offered it to about 20 publishers, and nobody wanted it. Eventually, he came to
Says a lot
Doubleday,
about publishers.
and they said, okay, we'll take a chance. And it became an immediate bestseller. You can imagine how sorry all those other publishers are. Because, you know, it sold millions and millions, and still sells millions and millions of copies.
May I ask you, you spoke about your brother who was a talented painter, and you essentially lived the exact same story as Anne Frank. The only difference is you survived. Was there ever a hint of resentment that her story became world famous and so many millions of others did not?
Yes, well, true. Very often my mother said, together we said, you know, what about Heinz? Anne writes in her diary, by the way, when she dies, she would like to live on. Well, she does that. But my mother said, what about Heinz? Nobody knows about him. And he too was such a wonderful person and gentle boy, and so talented. A musician, a painter, a poet. He taught himself 6 languages when he was in hiding. He would have given the world something wonderful. And when Otto got the diary, through all this terrible thing, we had actually forgotten about the painting. But when Otto got the diaries, we said together, what about Heinz's painting? We know where they are, we have to go and get them. And we did. And we went to this house and we opened the floorboards and we found some amazing, 30 beautiful paintings which Heinz created. And this is really our, what we have from him. And, but as well, when he was 12 years old, being so sensitive, he was afraid of dying. And so one day he asked me, what will happen when we die? Will we just disappear? So we went to my father in the morning, and Heinz asked, Papi, what will happen when we die? And my father said, if you have children, you will live on in your children. But then this 12-year-old boy said, but what if I die before I have any children? And my father said, I promise you nothing gets lost. We are all a link in a big chain which gets from generation to generation. And whatever you have created, whatever you have said, somebody will remember. You will not be forgotten. So in 2006, I wrote a book about Heinz, about promise, to keep the promise to my father that Heinz won't be forgotten. Unfortunately, we are sold out of that book, but you can get it on Amazon.
Yes. Mrs. Schloss has written 3 books. One of them is for sale.
And it's a lovely book for young people.
I want to ask you a couple more questions, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience, but I want to get to a couple of things. You waited many years to tell your story. You talked about how you did not want to speak about it. At first you did, but then nobody wanted to hear, and later, when others perhaps were ready to hear, you weren't ready to tell. What changed that?
Well, first of all, you know, as I said to you, we thought the world had changed, but the world hadn't changed. There was again genocides, killing, wars, and so I realized the Holocaust hadn't been taught, and many people knew Holocaust, but they didn't really know what really had happened. And so I realized it is necessary to educate people, to realize how bad it is to be prejudiced, to have hatred, not to trust other people, and to discriminate against, especially because the world has become multiracial, multicolored everywhere now. There's much more movement. I mean, in Austria at the time, I don't think there existed a Muslim person. There were Catholics and Jews, and that was it. But nowadays, people are from all over the world, live together, and there is discrimination. And so I realized we have to open up and talk to people. And people wanted to learn and wanted to know. Many universities have started Holocaust studies. In school it has become very often compulsory to teach the Holocaust. And as I say, you know, I could go and speak every day and ask all over the world to come and talk. And people are really interested and want to learn and to know about it.
You have seen surely the worst of humankind. I wonder what becomes of your faith and hope.
Yes, well, the rabbi said today, of course it is unfortunately not quite true that in the camps that we kept believing. We did pray. That was the only thing what we could do, was pray for God to stop this. But God was silent. So me and many other people came out of the camp, and we were atheists. And not just in God, we didn't believe in humanity either. If you see human beings acting like those Nazis did, how can you trust anybody? And as well, I told you it was wonderful in Holland, but nevertheless there were many Nazis. People thought at first that Hitler was going to win the war, so they joined the Nazi party, and those were the people, many thousands, who betrayed Jewish people. So, you know, I just didn't trust anybody anymore. And if you live like that, you're a very miserable person. So, and it wasn't me, because I wasn't really like that. So I tried to change, I tried to accept against things. And I questioned, every rabbi I met, I questioned, what is the answer to the Holocaust? And the answer is you don't question, you accept. But, you know, that was very, very difficult. But I think the birth of my first daughter, which was a miracle because I couldn't conceive at first, and I was really damaged mentally and physically, that I was able to conceive again, I thought that was a miracle. That my mother had survived. There were some other miracles which we haven't got time, unfortunately. That I met my father once in Auschwitz 3 times, a miracle. And I thought that I survived. Perhaps there is more to life than just being born and dying.
And you've instilled Jewish values in your children?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a very, very proud Jew. In 1938, I had an uncle who emigrated to England, and he converted to Anglican religion. My father would never talk to him. He said, just because you're persecuted, you want to give up your faith. So very often I get asked, are you sorry you are Jew? Do you want to change your religion? I said, no. First of all, I wouldn't dream of it, but as well I would feel I would betray the 6 billion people who died for their faith. So I'm a very strong Jew, and I must say, since I have been in close contact with Chabad movement, which is quite marvelous. I've met perhaps 100 Chabad rabbis with their families, and the warmth and the belief and the strength which those people relate to other people is amazing.